Nothing on the show is to be construed as legal advice. The contents of this show are for informational purposes only.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Know Your Rights, the Consumer Lawcast with me, Abbas Kazerounian. Today we have a very special guest. We've got David Winnett. He is a named partner at, this is a long name, so I'm actually going to have to read it, Liuzzi, Murphy, Solomon, Churton, Hale Winnett, LLP. And not only is David a named partner at the firm, he is also a very good friend of mine. And furthermore, 2 years ago, him and Craig Peters, who worked on a case together, were named the Consumer Attorneys of California. That means, and it's not just a given title. This is where their own peers voted for them and voted them the best consumer lawyers in the entire state of California, with a population of some 40 million people. So this is no ordinary lawyer here, and phenomenal trial attorney, but most importantly, a really, really good guy. And thank you for being here, David. Really appreciate you.
Well, Abbas, I mean, it's an honor to be here, and we got the award, and that was terrific, but I think the fact that you're the one who told our story and presented us to the panel didn't hurt us.
Well, so, that's very nice of you to say, but when we're going to actually talk about that case, and hopefully I'm going to get to bring Craig on another episode, and he can talk about it as well. It's such an important case because this particular episode, I want to talk about product liability, and the importance of attorneys like yourself litigating products cases and how it protects consumers, not just in California, but the entire nation. But I want to start with kind of a more broad brushstroke kind of topic, which is that plaintiffs' lawyers, and specifically in the realm of personal injury, are labeled as ambulance chasers in the media and by corporate America that run this propaganda through the media. And obviously I'm biased and you're somewhat biased because we're plaintiffs' lawyers, but it is a massive misconception. And I wanted to kind of get your guttural reaction on what you think of that and why it's so untrue.
As I expect we'll talk extensively today, the government doesn't always do everything it should to protect us as consumers. Other drivers out on the roadways don't always think of the other people on the roadways. We live in a society that often is too driven by self-interest. And what we do, what plaintiffs' lawyers do, is level the playing field, right? You know, horrible things happen to people through no fault of their own. And without tort lawyers, then there's no way for those people to get compensated, to be able to return to some normalcy in their lives, to make up for the lost income that they've suffered because of the fault of someone else. So, I mean, the job that we have is tremendously important, and for people to denigrate it the way they do is it's disrespectful and it's a punch in the gut, but it's really contrary to what we should as a society be concerned about, which is taking care of our people and having as safe a community and as safe a world as we can. And that's what we help do. So I hate the jokes, and I try to dismiss them. People call me an ambulance chaser, and I say, no, I'm an ambulance catcher. Yeah. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
No, I think those are profound words, but I think just to even like compound on what you're saying, like I mean, obviously a massive part of what tort lawyers and personal injury lawyers and product liability lawyers are doing is giving an ability to make victims whole, which is what you described. But I think they're doing more than that. I think the government cannot possibly police everything. And tort law is not a crime. So it's not something that the district attorneys can be out there prosecuting. It's really the private citizens policing corporate America, because obviously, you know the saying, you give an inch, they take a mile, right? If they're not policed, they're going to just keep cutting corners on being able to make kind of defective products so that they can enhance their profitability at the expense of consumers' lives. And unless there's this policing going on, that gap between profit and safety is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think there is no better example than the Ford Pinto cases, where it came out in litigation. This is not, innuendo or. Are you all right, Dave? All right. Don't want you to choke.
Took a drink of water. That was a mistake.
Coming live from the Bay Area, Dave choking. But going back to what I was saying, like in the Pinto cases, and more recently in the talcum powder cases that are going on against Johnson & Johnson, there is very good evidence to show that these companies knew of safety issues that would absolutely hurt consumers, and they chose not to do anything about it because they wanted the profits over people's safety, and they thought we'll pay the lawsuits later if anybody finds out. And that is one of the fundamental reasons of why I do what I do, because I want to curb that and stop that behavior, which I don't think will ever happen because human nature is what it is. But I think that's as important, that prophylactic effect that I hope what we do has, as well as the ability to make victims whole.
Absolutely. Yeah, that government, either it's there are too many fish for the government to fry, there are too many things for the government to keep its eye on, or there's money spent by lobbyists and huge corporate money that's going to these politicians to get them to turn a blind eye. I mean, there's so much of that. It's rampant, and as we'll talk about later, so many standards that haven't changed for decades, half century. It's interesting that you should talk about the criminal side. I started my career as a prosecutor. So I started trying cases representing people who had bad things happen to them as a result of the criminal acts of others. And so I very much liken the work that I do now to that role, which is going after the wrongdoers, albeit not criminally, but in the civil arena, to try to force change that the government may not be, for whatever reason, enforcing on its own. Then we're having to make that law. Exactly. We're having to make those arguments. We're going to have to push the society forward in ways that make it safer because nobody else is going to do it.
Exactly right. So kind of going like as a good transition for what you're saying about, standards not changing. And we'll get to the standards not having changed on the latter part. I really want to talk about your Mazda case, this amazing verdict that you got. Would you kindly just kind of lay out the facts of that case and what happened to your client? And then we'll get into the defect and, the NHTSA regulations.
Sure. So we represented a woman who was driving. She was headed off to buy a dress for a wedding. And she was driving a Mazda Protege, and she was driving it on Interstate 980 in the Bay Area near sundown. So she was driving into the setting sun. Yeah. And there were cars that had stopped ahead of her. There'd been a crash ahead of her, and she saw traffic slowing down, and so she slowed down and came to a stop. But there was someone driving a work pickup truck behind her. So not only was it a larger vehicle, but it was also a vehicle loaded with construction equipment. So it was a considerably heavier vehicle, did not see that traffic had stopped ahead, and was blinded by the sun setting, and slammed into her car at highway speeds at 55 miles an hour, and hit her car with such impact that it forced her into another car in front of her and flipped that car up into the air. It was a very significant high-speed crash. There was no evidence that he had braked beforehand, just a devastating impact. And because his car was so heavy and her car was so poorly built, she suffered massive injuries. The seat back gave way and forced her into the back seat of her car. And as the pickup truck continued on into the car, the metal was forced up and bent her back forward But what had happened was, and what happens in these cases is when a person is rear-ended, she ramps up. She ramped up and out of her seatbelt. So when the truck got into the back the compartment of the car, it bent her forward like a clamshell in a place where her body wasn't supposed to bend, and shattered a number of vertebrae, destroyed her nerve structure below her waist, rendered her an incomplete paraplegic. She has no sensation or function below her waist. She also suffered a brain injury, just a massive, horrible set of injuries that were caused by this crappy seat.
One of the things that stands out to me about, remember, as you described that case, one of the worst things is she got the worst of both worlds, is that she has no feeling below the waist. And then she had this something arachnoiditis. I can't remember the name of
Yeah.
I had to learn it for when I presented it, but I can't remember the name of the thing. But
adhesive arachnoiditis.
there you go.
So the nerves in her spinal cord stretched out from the impact, and so as that happens, it creates scar tissue that's like spaghetti that's gotten wet and then dried back together again. So these bundles of nerves are such that they can't ever properly perform. And so, yes, she can't move or have function below her waist, but she still has this uncontrollable, unpredictable, horrible pain that comes from this arachnoiditis. And she was a young woman. She was 42 when this happened. And so she's got a lifetime of this horrible pain that she can't tell when it's coming and can't stop it when it does. And it can last for hours at a time. Just a horrific injury.
And that pain, I think, is like she would get shooting pains down her spine, and it's going to happen for the rest of her life, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, it was a horrific injury that is life-changing for the worst. It's just horrific. And I remember looking at this case, and Mazda's initial and foremost defense is, well, what did we do wrong? We've built the car exactly to what, beyond or the same as the minimal federal regulations as adhered by NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation Administration. And, and then if you look at, and they put pictures of the car in front of the jury to basically show like she should be thanking Mazda that she's alive. We're the greatest. And so like, tell our audience, what's the problem with that?
Well, as we're being reminded of the case, and you're telling that story, we had preserved the car and we brought it to the court, and the jury went out into the courtyard next to the courthouse. And it so happened that Craig, you mentioned earlier, who tried the case with me, Craig's mom was there that day. And so Craig's mom was standing near Craig while the jury was walking around and looking at this car. And Craig's mom said to Craig, "It's a wonder she's alive."
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. So if Craig's mom isn't even with us, so they were relying on these standards that were, from the 70s, to try to claim that all they needed to do was do what the government said they needed to do.
Yeah.
And that clearly wasn't good enough, because the seat could not. The evidence we had footage from when this car was being designed and developed, and they do these things called crash tests. And so there was footage of crash testing of this car that showed that this ramping effect that I described to you, the seat giving way, and this ramping effect takes place at speeds as low as 17 miles an hour. And so, yeah, we had a huge high-speed crash here, but it didn't take a high-speed crash to cause this seat to break.
Yeah. I mean, it's more than foreseeable that somebody driving that car is going to get rear-ended at more than 17 miles an hour, which is crazy.
Yep.
But let's take a little time out from something that you just said, and I really wanted to make a big point of it here. For those of you that hear all these ambulance chases and, you know, all this kind of propaganda in the media, there's a flip side to this coin. Okay, like what David said is absolutely right. The regulations on seat back safety have not changed since the early 70s. We're in 2020 right now. That's over 4 decades. We're almost 5 decades for that matter. In almost 50 years, as technology has improved, as speeds on the motorway or the freeway have increased, the safety standards have not. And there's only one rational reason for that. I mean, if we all watch our TVs and look at the advertisements, there is a pattern of commercials, okay? Insurance companies, banks and credit cards, auto manufacturers, and food and drugs, right? Those like, and if you, and next time if you've never thought about it, next time you're watching TV, look at the commercials. Drugs, food, bank, car, insurance, repeat. That's what it is. And those 5 industries that I just outlined correlate to every capital of every state and Washington, D.C. with their lobbies. They are the ones with the most money in this country, and they're the ones with the most influence in our country. And they spend not millions, but billions on the state level and the national level, making sure that these regulations are not enhanced because it costs them money. It costs them on the baseline, on their ledgers, and profitability is what keeps corporate America moving. And if they have to increase these safety regulations, it's going to cost them millions of dollars. And they don't want to pay millions of dollars. They want to make millions of dollars. And that's why, for example, these safety regulations have not changed in close to 50 years. This is not a conspiracy theory that we're coming up with. This is just fact. And so it's really, really important that the narrative that consumers hear about ambulance chases is given a fair platform. And you're hearing about it on a podcast, whereas the ambulance chases, like, you know, the propaganda is put out on the mainstream media. We can't compete dollar for dollar with State Farm or Bank of America or Bayer, a major pharma. Those people have the platform of major media on every level: radio, TV, internet, Facebook, everything. And fighting that narrative is very, very difficult. And what I'm asking the consumers to do is not just take my word for it, but at least consider this conversation in that narrative before you make an informed decision. And I think that's really, really important. And that's why your case was so important. That's why your case was so important, because what David did was, irrespective of the fact that our government hadn't changed these safety standards in 50 years, and the likes of Mazda, Ford, Nissan, et cetera, have been in the court system year after year, putting on the same defense. Well, we adhere to federal standards. We adhere to federal standards, and got very good results in the court system, basically emboldened them to keep doing what they're doing. But what David's case did is he created a blueprint on how to overcome that and beat that. That means that lawyers across the rest of the country can go look at that docket, look at that court case, and see how they did it. And they can emulate that and copy that. And hopefully, if everybody begins to emulate that method of litigation against the likes of Mazda, they can get some traction and maybe make a difference. Maybe, not definitely, but maybe. And that's why what David does is so important from my perspective.
And thank you. And why products liability law is so important, because it's a judicially created concept, right? I mean, it was that the courts were finding that the laws as they existed were not adequately protecting consumers. So the court stepped up and said, you know what? The traditional concept of negligence and only being able to sue someone with whom you have a direct interaction, that's not going to cut it in a case like this, where there's some manufacturer in some other state, let alone some other country, is creating a product that ends up in my community and causes injury to people in my community. So we should be able to, the courts, figure out a way to have findings of liability against those distant manufacturers and distributors and retailers, and that's how products liability was born.
Exactly. And so, like, a lot of people think that, products liability are just to do with cars or whatever, but I cannot think of any individual in the United States, whether they're in California, Montana, or Texas, that are not affected by products on a daily, day-to-day basis. Everything that we do, from the minute we get up in the morning to the minute we go to sleep at night, is affected by products and their safety, the consumer safety as they relate to those products, is really what should be at the forefront of product liability litigation. And so people get up in the morning and they make themselves smoothies, for example. I've seen a ton of litigation on, for example, the Ninja mixers or other liquidizers and juicers, to people mowing their lawns and getting defective lawnmowers. And even consumables, they're deemed products. They're the products that manufacturers put out and you put into your body. That's a product. And the way they label it, the way they represent it, all of this is, I fall under the umbrella of products liability. And even things like that we don't even think about, children's toys. How much litigation have you ever seen, David, about unsafe toys?
Absolutely. Tons. Do you remember Saturday Night Live, the old skit about the toy manufacturer? These are these kids' toys that should be safe, and a bag of broken glass. I mean, it's it's amazing how many products have been marketed to children as toys over the years that have caused them injuries, and been sent out into the marketplace as being perfectly acceptable. It's you mentioned Johnson & Baby powder, for heaven's sake.
Yeah. This is like Johnson & Johnson has like built up a brand over the years of being a family product and like something that people rely on. They bought it over generic brands because it's Johnson & Johnson, right? And women have been using the baby powder like on the kind of private areas for years and years and years. And right now we're finding an epidemic of women that use this on a regular and systematic basis with ovarian cancer. And there is litigation going on nationwide on this, where juries are coming back with not 7-figure verdicts, but 8- and 9-figure verdicts because of how horrendous and egregious they've found Johnson & Johnson's conduct. And there's memos that go back to the 80s from their in-house scientists that suggest that there is carcinogens in that product. We're not talking, and the thing is, these are not like, unfortunately, like companies a lot of the time, and I'm not suggesting that Johnson & Johnson did this because I don't know all the facts, but it certainly suggests that they did. But a lot of companies treat people like statistics. But we're talking about people's wives and mothers and daughters, that are being affected. And unless it happens to you, people have a tendency to put their head in the sand. And, but we get to deal with it in the trenches on the front line. When you see somebody's husband that's distraught, or somebody's father or mother that are basically devastated through the loss of, a very close family member or even friend, that's when it hits you about how things, should need changing. How many times have you had a wrongful death case and that family perhaps had no conception of how dangerous the world is or whatever, and then they suddenly are there and you're like, I never knew, and now they know because it happened to them. Every day.
It is when I describe what I do, I did it today. I was at a networking thing this morning and I said, there are so many hidden ways, so many ways that horrible things can happen to people just from going about their daily lives. And the products that you use every day can kill you, can maim you, can cause you horrible harm. And that's why we do what we do, because if we don't, who does?
Exactly right.
And it's not cheap to do what we do. It's not cheap.
That is very true.
And we have the craziest business concept in the world, which is, okay, I will take on this case and I will begin this work, and there's no guarantee that I will ever get paid. And I might not even be paid, but I will put out, in that Mazda case, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
in litigation costs to get the case to the point where we went to trial with no promise that we were ever going to be paid.
Yeah, I think that concept is lost on people. I mean, like, you're talking about a product liability case. Let's say with a car, since we're talking about the Mazda case today, you probably had to have a biomechanic. You probably had to have a reconstruction expert. You probably had to have a life care planner, a neurologist, orthopedic surgeon, economist, and I'm probably missing some. You know, I'm just naming 6 or 7 off the top of my head.
Okay, vocational consultant.
Vocational consultants,
Yep.
et cetera, right? And so, I mean, each one of those experts, to take that through trial, because you have to hire them, get their opinion, get them to write a report, consult with them, help them sit through their deposition, and then you have to then prepare them for trial, and then they go for trial. And on the low end, some of those experts are charging you $350 an hour, and on the high end, when you're talking about neurologists, they're charging you $900 to $1,000 an hour. Each one of those experts is probably going to cost you anywhere between $12,000 to $25,000 to take through trial. If you've got 10 experts, that's $250,000 right off the bat. And you're not even talking about the deposition costs. You're not talking about the filing fees. And you're not talking about your time. And lawyers, their trade is the commodity of time. They sell time. And contingency lawyers, they give up time with the hope of getting paid at the end. But they're also outputting this money and the resources. It's not just the time that they're putting out as a risk. They're putting out money and time. And on that case, I imagine that on that case, you guys probably spent 2, 3, 4, 5,000 hours, something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. And all those experts you mentioned, they aren't doing it on a contingency fee.
They get paid up front.
They're getting paid by the hour.
Yeah, exactly.
And all the defense lawyers. I had a case. I had a wrongful death case involving a bucket truck where a tree trimmer who was trimming lines for PG&E was up in the truck, and the chain that kept his bucket level broke, and so it dumped him out and killed him, unfortunately. And we had to sue so many different entities that were involved in the making and distribution of that truck, right? And so there's the truck, and there's the lift device, and there's the bucket, and there's the maintenance companies. We sued 16 different entities.
Wow.
And each of those 16 entities hired experts and hired lawyers, and I hired experts, and I would go to the inspection of this truck, and there'd be dozens of people.
Yep.
All of them billing by the hour, except me.
Yep.
And that's the job, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because that's my conversation with defense lawyers. I always tell you, like, I always, when they make, these kind of jokes, against us, I'm like, well, listen, you get paid to be wrong. I only take cases that, like, where I think I'm gonna have to win, because unless I win, I don't get paid.
Yeah, and without me, you don't have a job. And so I've got another case. A guy was operating a forklift type device and suffered a pretty horrible injury, and I was having a conversation at one of these inspections where everybody else is getting paid by the hour and I'm not, and I sort of have this conversation with the defense lawyer, and he said something like, "Trust me, Dave, I know you're the elephant barreling through the jungle, and all of us are benefiting from what the elephant deposits in what's growing out of what the elephant leaves in the jungle."
Yeah.
So their whole livelihood is dependent upon us. That's another part of this, is the litigation industry, if you will.
And it is an industry.
It's an industry. Experts and insurance companies and defense lawyers and
the vendors that go with it, like deposition companies, people that make the videos for the day in the life videos, all kinds, like lien resolution people, so many vendors. It is a whole industry. And unless, and everybody wants, part of the profits or whatever, and literally the only people that don't get paid until there is a resolution of that case are the plaintiff's lawyers. Everybody else gets paid.
Yep.
Everybody else gets paid.
Yep.
So anyway,
what a great idea.
But honestly, it's been like such a privilege to have you on the show. Any words of wisdom before we call it for this episode?
I just always ask people to spend time to think of their fellow person, and believe best intentions. That what we do because we're trying to make the world a better place and a safer place. And it's been an honor to chat with you about this, and I know that this is what you've dedicated your career to, and helping so many consumers. And it's an honor to know you, and an honor to be part of this. And I hope someday I get one of those shirts.
Thank you so much. I'll tell you what, we could do one of those, beginning of football or soccer matches where they swap. Like, well, we should make that a tradition. Like, I'll send one in advance and we'll wear each other's shirt. That'd be kind of cool.
That's awesome.
But very honestly, really, I take what you say to heart, and thank you very much. I mean, your words mean a lot, and honestly, real pleasure to have you on the show. And I know how busy you are, so thank you for that. If any of our viewers have, any questions or whatever, you can always get in touch with David. David, what's your email if anybody wants to reach out to you?
Dave@lmslaw.com.
There you go. And obviously, if anybody doesn't have it, contact us through our website, and we'll put you in touch with David as well. He's honestly, like, even though he's a brilliant lawyer, he's an even better human being. So he's definitely worth knowing. So thank you all for tuning in again. Really appreciate you on Know Your Rights, the Consumer Law Cast. And until next time, keep it legal.
Take care, everybody.